Russia just had their worst month ever in terms of casualties, and it's something we have to talk about because it's starting to become something that Russia doesn't know how to control. When they first got their information about these attacks, let's just say they never expected Ukraine to have all the ammunition that it has now. Let's go ahead and kind of back up to about 2 months ago. If you remember, it was around that time that Ukrainians started saying, hey, Russia is putting together a massive amount of troops and equipment just northeast of Kharkiv. Now, obviously, just northeast of Kharkiv is Belgorod, or just Russia. And Russia kind of knew early on that there really wasn't much Ukrainians could do in terms of hitting their positions in Russia. You see, when Ukraine got all of their weapons, they were given to them with a little bit of like an underlining in the fine print, which was, hey, here's weapons, whether it's from the UK, the United States, Germany, France, etc. We'll give you these weapons, but you cannot strike into Russia with them. And Ukraine held to their word. They said, yeah, we're not going to do that. Do not worry. And so over time, Russia realized that, hey, if we put troops along this border, Russia will be able to push through, and Ukraine can't stop all the artillery and anything that's being launched on the Russian side. So Ukraine had a problem. They knew they couldn't strike the Russians with US, UK, French, German weapons, and so they developed their own. They started putting together Neptune missiles that could be launched on land, which are usually for ships in the Black Sea, but instead they're being used now on Russian positions in Russia. They have other drones and other equipment. But Russia knew that they could still target Ukraine, and since at that point in time, remember, 2 months ago, Ukraine didn't have a steady flow of shells. They were losing cities and villages and towns because they were not getting the ammunition and the backup chain up and running. Russia then started formulating a plan. Hey, if we attack Ukraine from Kharkiv direction, they can't stop us because we're in Russia. The only issue is Russia and the rest of the world didn't know that the United States would just turn around and say, you know what? We're going to give you weapons. And within a week, U.S. Congress voted in new packages. They gave Ukraine instant shells and other things, such as Patriot missiles and HIMARS and other things, which would allow Ukrainians to push back the Russians. Now, Russia already was underway with trying to push through Kharkiv about 2 weeks ago. And at that point, Ukraine didn't have enough shells, and so Russia started coming in. But then things were rushed to the front lines. And Ukrainians were able to fight back, pushing back the Russians, not all the way out of Kharkiv state, but further enough back. At the same time, you had other countries calling for the United States, the UK, France, etc., to allow Ukraine to strike in Russian territory using US or whatever other countries' weapons. And that had been a back and forth battle. Hey, should we not? Should we not? While that's going on, Ukrainians started getting all the shells and started a supply chain, being able to push back those Russians. And that had caused a major influx of people lost on the front lines. We're talking about, for the month of May alone, Russia had lost 38,942. That is roughly about 1,250 people a day. Now, that number is across the entire front lines, but the bulk of it is happening right there in Kharkiv. And now we're seeing from Russian military bloggers and from other propaganda channels that Russia is not doing well. They're losing a lot of equipment and a lot of men. And if you remember, Russia originally said they were going to put about 30,000 people on the front lines in Kharkiv, and that even if you say 1,000 people a day, that means that Russia would only have about 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks until they're out of men that they originally allocated for this attack. Things are only about to get worse for Russians. You see, just 2 days ago, it was announced that Ukraine can use Western weapons to attack Russian bases and Russian launchers. But there are a lot of strings attached to this. It can't be HIMARS, and right now Zelensky is asking them, hey, can we change that? Because we kind of need those ones to do it. And it can only be northeast of Kharkiv. That's also a problem. And the reason why I say that is because right now Russia is putting together more troops to try to attack the Sumy region, which is just north of Kharkiv. And as far as we know, Russia is going to be trying to go even further south. They're trying to stretch out this front line as long as they can so they can thin out Ukrainians and all of its equipment. All of that could cause even bigger problems if the U.S. does not give Ukraine full authority to strike anywhere within, let's just say, 50 kilometers of the front lines or on the border with Russia. Now, while all that is going on, I also want you to keep in mind F-16s. You see, we're told that sometime mid-June, Ukraine will get F-16s. That, along with other air defense systems and more long-range missiles or medium-range missiles, well, Ukraine is going to continue this even if Russia were to stop attacking in Kharkiv. You see, Ukraine, for the past 6 months, didn't have the ammunition or the chain that they needed in order to continue to push the Russians back. Because of that, once again, they lost so much land and a lot of men. But now that Ukraine not only is going to be able to get all that equipment, they also have all the stuff they developed over the past few months to kind of counter the fact that they didn't have the other weapons. We're going to see a major change starting either it be mid-June or late July of Ukrainians using everything they have to push the Russians back. And it's one of those things where you can think about the possibilities now, because if you've noticed in the past month, we've seen Ukrainians use Neptunes in ways that they've never used them before and strike targets that would probably be out of their reach. I mean, they've gotten drones that went, 1,800 kilometers? We're seeing, whether they're sea babies or other naval drones make their way into waters that used to be protected and would have been gone before they got there. And we've seen missiles get through air defenses in Russia and hit targets, once again, with air defenses, aka Russia does not have any air defenses in their country. Ukrainians have been able to push through on many different areas, which means what? We're going to be seeing a lot of destruction, more than likely towards Crimea, heading up towards Mariupol. I think that the bulk of what we're going to see is going to happen in the Sea of Azov, as Ukrainians try to take down more transport ships and any other Russian ships are currently in there. Once they take control of those waters and then have F-16s in the skies taking care of things on the land, Russia is going to have nowhere to go. And I think that this could be the beginning of the end, as Russia is not seeming to want to give up. And if Ukraine is continuing on this, say, 1,200, even 1,000 person loss a day to the Russians, there's only so long until Russia runs out of qualified men or highly experienced men to even continue to fight. And Russia, since the beginning of this, has been using, the throw everything you have at it, see what sticks kind of method. And after a while, that's not going to help Russia, because if Ukraine is able to take down all of their radars, their installations, their launchers, then those men on the ground will legitimately have nothing to protect them. And more than likely, those men would rather put up a white flag than be taken down because their leadership doesn't know when to actually stop and throw in the towel. And just to put it in perspective, just in the past day and the amount of equipment that Russia had lost, yesterday they lost about 1,000 men, 1,100. They lost 25 tanks, another 49 artillery, which could be many different forms, different shells, and 33 vehicles. That is a major loss in just one day. Now that's happening every day. And let's just say that Russia only has, X amount of tanks or X amount of this. They can't produce them fast enough to keep this going. Well, Ukraine is battering away at Russia at a rate of 1 to 8, meaning for every 1 Ukrainian that has a casualty, that's 8 Russians. And they're looking at a 1 to 4 when it comes to equipment on the ground. Russia can't keep up at that rate. They could probably keep going for another 6 months before you could really start seeing holes in everything. But at this rate, in the next, say, 6 months, Russia is not going to be able to hold on that rate and will have to give up positions, more than likely towards Kherson and maybe towards Crimea, more all the way up to maybe Mariupol. And I know that some Russian trolls are going to come on YouTube and say, oh, well, you're wrong, because there's actually certain areas in the front lines where Ukrainians are falling back and Russians are moving forward. And I have to say, in some aspects, you are right. There are certain areas right now where Russians are currently in the process of moving forward. But if Ukraine can get Kharkiv under control and Sumy under control, they can move, and keep in mind, that's where most of the fighting is taking place. They can move all those resources to those areas and be able to push those Russians back once again. The only other thing I want you to keep in mind with Putin's war machine right now is the fact that they rely on sales of oil and gas in order to fund this war. I mean, the amount of billions of dollars a year that Putin is putting in order to do this is a number that I don't think we've ever seen before. I mean, it's more money. I don't know what the inflation rate would be for World War II, but it's a number that we've never seen before. And so Ukraine has now knocked out, 15% of Russia's production of oil and gas? If Ukraine can continue to do that, Russia is going to have no choice but either to raise the price to the point to where people can't buy it, which we know they can't do because they already lowered the price for China to buy it because their economy is awful, and they're only one of 3 people who's actually buying it. Or we're going to get to the point to where Russia won't have anyone buying it at all, which means that Russia won't be able to afford to make all the equipment or buy the parts to make this equipment. And I know the United States has been saying to Ukraine, if you keep doing this, it's going to cause a global issue. And I mean, for 2 years, many countries have been dealing with said issue where prices have been higher. But right now, prices are kind of average. I know where I'm located at, it's actually below average of what it usually is. So I don't really think that's a thing. I think just here in the U.S., it's an election year, and anytime anything goes up, they try to say, no, we're not doing that. And at the end of the day, Ukraine should be able to do whatever they should be able to do without being questioned. You know, they followed every single rule that the United States, the UK, France, and Germany put out there when it comes to war, and then some. I mean, they don't hit civilian targets, they only hit military bases. On the other hand, all Russia does is hit civilians. Look what they're doing in Kharkiv. Look what they're doing in Dnipro. Look what they're doing in Odessa. It's all they do. They specifically target civilians. They try to do blackouts, critical infrastructure, which I know critical infrastructure is one of those things that is always on the table, is a military target. It's just annoying that it keeps happening, and it shouldn't be happening. But ultimately, I see what you're seeing. Ukraine has all these new weapons. They have a supply chain. They've developed their own weapons. They've already destroyed most of the Russian military, and as far as we know, Russia is slowing down to the point to where they're not going to be able to train new men fast enough to get them to the front lines. This all spells the fact that within the next 6 months, we could be looking at a completely different war on the ground. But I want to know what you think in the comments section below. And I apologize if this was a little bit out there, and I don't really go on long rants like this, but we're just seeing a lot of things happen at once. And I feel like it's all part of a major plan that Sersky kind of put together in order to get Ukraine in a position to where they can attack a lot of things all at once and really distract the Russians to the point to where they don't know what to do, and or take down enough of the Russians who are trained to where they won't actually have a intelligent military who most likely will get to the front lines and say, I'm not doing this, put a white flag up, and then walk away. But I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comment section below. And I want to thank you for joining me. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. I'll see you later. Bye.